Hi, I'm Peter and welcome back to the History and Saber Suite, the channel where I talk about HEMA, history and swords. Now it's been a while, and given that my most recent videos were more on the swordy side, I'm going to focus more on the history side this time around. I'm going to talk to you about dueling today, more specifically dueling in the late Austro-Hungarian Empire, and even more specifically I'm going to tell you the story of a specific duel that happened in the summer of 1909 in Budapest. Why? Because this specific duel is something that I came across while researching my master's thesis last year, so in 2021. And since then, it's become one of my favorite stories to tell in HEMA circles and outside of HEMA, actually, for this simple reason that it's an obscure, peculiar story that highlights the dueling situation in Austria-Hungary at the time quite well. And also, it's just a funny story to tell, really, for all the tragic consequences it had on the actual people involved historically, of course. So let me just tell you the story and focus on the context and little bits and pieces of information afterwards. So let's get on with the story. It's July of 1909, and at a restaurant in Budapest, the hussar officer BJ, we don't know his actual name, so he's just called BJ in the newspaper article, is dining there with his clerical companion, and at a nearby table there's another person dining with somebody else, and that's Ernst Frenkel, who was the director of the agricultural bank in Pest. So one half of Budapest is Pest, the other one is Buda, hence Budapest. And Ernst Frenkel, the bank director, orders something, and the hussar officer picked up on that and made a remark to his clerical companion. Now, unfortunately for him, as you'll see later, Ernst Frenkel heard the hussar officer's harmless remark, as the newspaper article reports. And what does he do? He sends his business card over to the military officer, and when the officer receives the card, he turns it around, and then he was probably shocked. There was Frenkel's handwriting on the back of the business card saying Bauer, which translates to farmer in the pejorative sense of peasant, which is still kind of used like that in German sometimes. Nothing against farmers, of course, but it says Bauer, peasant. And as the honor code that the hussar officer is bound to would tell him, he would have had to draw his saber, but he couldn't. Why? Because the bank director Frenkel had already pulled out his revolver and aimed it at the hussar officer, preventing the officer from drawing his sword. He was probably furious, I can only imagine. And imagine this all happening at a restaurant in the summer. It's kind of bizarre. And what happened next? Well, a duel was agreed upon. The next day they met for a pistol duel, but it doesn't end there. Imagine the year 1909, and the bank director Frenkel, he shows up with his private automobile. He just shows up with a car, just imagine. Unfortunately for the hussar officer, he got wounded, and Frenkel won the duel, so to speak. So the duel was concluded with the hussar officer being wounded on the floor, on the ground, and it doesn't end there either. So what does Ernst Frenkel, the bank director, do? He takes the horse of the hussar officer, cavalry officer showing up on his horse, quite plausible. Frenkel takes his horse and rides home on the hussar officer's horse, whom he just shot down or wounded in a duel. It's so bizarre. And, it doesn't end there either. A few months later, as the newspaper article reports, Frenkel was actually arrested for large-scale fraud pertaining to his position as bank director, and also for relieving an old lady, I believe it was a widow even, of a large sum of her money. So he was arrested for those crimes, actually. We don't know what became of the hussar officer, but Frenkel just, he was actually a fraud, and he won the duel, and he did so in a quite bizarre way, and he behaved in a quite bizarre way, I would say. Now, why am I telling you this story? As I told you in the beginning, because it's a bizarre story, and the way these people behaved is, kind of indicative of the whole idea of honor that we have going on at the time, and also, the display of wealth by the bank director, and, looking down upon this just, simple hussar officer daring to make a remark about his order. So there's quite a few things going on, and I also want to tell you or recommend to you the famous, short novella, the interior monologue called Lieutenant Gustl by Arthur Schnitzler, who was not only an author but also a military officer in real life who got relieved of his rank because he refused a duel. So that's also a very real danger that officers found themselves in the early 20th century still, up until the First World War, basically. An insult against the officer was also, by analogy, an insult against the entire army, and the army represented the monarch. In this period, that was, of course, Kaiser Franz Joseph I. So this honor thing was quite serious for people as a social construct, and the pressure was immense on officers to keep to that honor code, and also to this concept of personal and collective honor that was intertwined, so much so that an insult against an officer was also an insult against the army, and an insult against the army in the presence of an officer was also an insult against the officer. So and whenever this concept of honor was violated, either by another officer or by a civilian, dueling was a very real option of dealing with that insult. And as it goes with Arthur Schnitzler, the author and officer I told you about, the military actually supported this very much. And if you would like to hear more about this topic, I'm happy to talk about that in future videos. And I'm just, I'm happy I could share this story with you, because I think it's just such a nice example of what could happen still in 1909 between military officers and civilians even, who could be of different social status, even, as you can see, as is implied by this story. And if you want to read the story for yourself, if you can read German, I'll link the article to Danzer's Armee-Zeitung, where you can read the article in its original scanned form online down below. And if you enjoyed this video, and if you would like to hear me talk about topics like this more in the future, let me know in the comments. I'll be sure to get up some content talking about duels and the dueling situation around 1900 a bit more. And yeah, on that note, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video and learned something. And on that note, see you in the next one. Bye bye.